take on all things happening from the perspective of two parents of BIPOC transgender youth.
Lisa, I think this is going to be another one of our epic rant episodes. There's been so much going on that I really think we need a debrief.
Steven, I'm totally here for it, especially because you were at the DNC and there's been so much going on in Arizona. We have to unpack it all.
Well, I'm ready to do just that. So welcome everyone once again to the Parent Advocate Podcast. Let's get started. All right, Lisette, I know we traditionally talk about what's been going on in our lives, but I don't think I can hold on to this stuff any longer.
Okay, I can't either, Steven. So if you're okay with me calling an audible, let's jump right into it and then we can just ad-lib some stuff along the way.
That totally works. So I'm going to jump in because I just got 3 letters for you. DNC. Nicole and I attended the Democratic National Convention this week in Chicago, and I am literally still pinching myself from the experience. There were just so many people from all stripes of life repping for Madam Vice President Kamala Harris, from the famous like Oprah, Don Cheadle, Spike Lee, Stevie Wonder, Kerry Washington, and the list goes on, to the infamous like George Conway and Chris Cuomo, to influencers like Legally Hype and the Under the Desk Reporter. There were just so many people, and every time I turned my head, I ran into someone else that I knew or I thought that I knew. Now, beyond the fact that history was being made with a Black Indian female presidential candidate and a super progressive white male vice presidential candidate who is very, 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 very LGBTQ plus. The overall energy of the past few days feels like we are at a true inflection point in this country's history. The top of the ticket has 2 pro LGBTQ plus people at the helm.
Steven, it's really, really exciting. I think too, I was watching a lot of obviously the protests that were happening around Palestine and the uncommitted movement. I was watching immigrant rights influencers who were there and reporters who were there talking about how the platform has shifted. And so I wish I would have been there with you because there just seemed to be so much happening. Amara texted me a few times and was like, it's incredible and also chaotic. And so it just must have been such a great historic place to be watching policy and watching people talk about policy in a really thoughtful, cutesy, demure way. We're going to carry it over into
we're
this
carrying
episode.
cutesy and demure over. Very mindful, very demure. But what
Very
else was happening, Lisette, that I think is important was, notwithstanding the protests outside, people were having those conversations inside. I saw a gaggle of reporters around a very obviously pro-Palestinian individual who had his piece inside the convention center. Now, there were people who were outside who were making their case for an arms embargo, which I think is the top of the food chain when it comes to what the United States and its allies can do to prevent Israel from creating even more harm in Palestine. But there were people inside who were having those discussions, those policy discussions with other politicos who were inside the convention hall, which I think is equally important. So I want to make sure that we don't, again, lose the forest through the trees, because it requires nuanced conversations in order for nuanced solutions that can actually be implemented to take place. And I think a lot of those people with really good intentions were keeping their eyes on the prize. And the eyes on the prize is making sure Donald Trump does not get a second term. And everything else that flows from Donald Trump not getting a second term, I think is possible. But if we don't focus on Donald Trump not getting a second term, I think all bets are off in terms of saving the Palestinian people,
saving ourselves,
getting an arms embargo, saving ourselves. All of these things, I think, cease to be possible if this idiot gets a second term.
No, I agree with you. I think strategically as voters, we have to ensure that we don't become a theocracy, which is what Project 2025 means to give us, right? And so I agree with you. And I think voting is imperative for all of us. It's our responsibility in this political moment in order to keep our children safe as well and the next generations to come. Okay, so on some good news, Steven, we won Arizona's class action lawsuit giving families of trans kids the ability to change their birth certificate. Most,
Woo!
most of you already know this, but we sued our state over access to birth certificates back in 2018. And eventually the state gave Daniel his birth certificate. But NCLR filed a class action lawsuit with New Family shortly afterwards. All that to say, we won our lawsuit on Monday. The judge ruled in favor of the kids and families on all claims and said, among other things, that the current statute violated the kids' rights to privacy, that the requirement for surgery was unconstitutional, and that the statute infringed on our kids' bodily autonomy. Even I have been working on this for like 7 years. People don't realize, like, from speaking to different lawyers who were like, trans kids don't win cases like this, to eventually getting in contact with a sophomore and him saying, actually, I think trans kids do. I'm just like, what in the world, alternate universe? It was lots of good news this week and we did it. I'm so excited.
Well, I just have to say that when I found out the news, when you shared the news with all of us, it was like Mardi Gras on Monday. It was one of those moments where you just have this visceral lifting of that oppressive, burdensome feeling that you had when you knew that your children weren't necessarily entitled to the same rights and liberties that everyone else had. And then the judges make a ruling that is in your benefit. And it's like the clouds open up and the sun starts shining down, because there is a sliver of hope that our children will be able to lead regular lives. People don't understand how important the ability to change your legal documents actually is in the lives of trans and non-binary children. Like, the fact that you have the ability to have that alignment between how you see yourself, how you present yourself, and what your documents say is just so affirming on so many levels that people don't seem to understand the significance of rulings like this.
And not just affirming, I think the day-to-day implications people don't even think about. Like, now that Daniel is getting ready to drive, right? If we couldn't update his identity documents and he got pulled over, they would think it was fraud, right? Like, he could get held up by police for fraud because his gender marker is stating that he should look stereotypically different than what he does in real life, right? Those were some of the reasons why, like, I pushed so hard for this, because I was like, oh my God. Once I started thinking through, and that at the time he was a lot younger and far away from driving, but I was like, this will carry through and could cause harm in so many different ways. And I just want to say, post-job, when women's right to bodily autonomy has been stripped from us, to have Judge Soto state that this was an infringement on trans youth's own bodily autonomy, considering that we live in a country that doesn't have children's rights protected, right? Children do not have bodily autonomy. This sets precedent. And so I was just floored, over the moon. So happy. The lawyers were happy. I talked to one of the kids on Tuesday morning and they were like so excited, but also they're not going to really, I think even Daniel, they don't really have like a full grasp of what they've done, like of what this incredible moment is, and how many people's lives they've changed. It's so amazing. All right.
I have a dad's support group that I attend every month, and yesterday we had a meeting, and at that meeting there was a father who was a trans man who has a trans son, and this very issue came up, and he said, I'm always concerned about what happens if I get into a car accident, and either I can't speak for my child or my child can't speak for themselves. What's going to happen? What's going to happen in that moment when they need care and the EMTs don't know how to provide the care, or the emergency room doctor doesn't know how to provide care, or the firefighters are dismayed because of what they find? It's like these types of things are things that people don't think about at all, but are very top of mind for parents of, trans and gender expansive youth, because these are real life situations that we actually have to contend with, and we have to think about, and we have to plan for.
Absolutely.
Which, of course, leads us to a couple states over, where Texas went in the exact opposite direction and ruled that trans Texans can no longer change their gender markers on their driver's licenses. This week, Texas quietly rolled out a new policy that prevents residents from changing the sex on their driver's licenses unless they are correcting a clerical error. The policy change, which was confirmed by the Texas Department of Public Safety, marks a significant shift from the previous practice that allowed Texans to update their sex marker by presenting a court order or an amended birth certificate. The rollout of this policy was notably secretive, with the change being implemented without public announcement or discussion, only coming to light through some really good investigative reporting. Now, this clandestine approach has really raised concerns among advocates and in the transgender community, as it adds another layer of difficulty for trans individuals seeking accurate identification. The new policy also aligns with broader efforts by the state to target transgender rights, including previous actions by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton and Governor Greg Abbott, which have sought to curtail gender affirming care and other supports for trans people. Critics argue the ability to have identification that accurately reflects one's gender is a basic form of dignity that should not be denied.
Even a few years ago, there was this meme of like a Harry Potter meme of like Hermione, Harry Potter, and the redheaded kid. I forget his name. And it was like Arizona, Texas, Florida at it again, right? Because we were always in lockstep. And this is the first time where I'm really starting to see my state want to break away from that toxic relationship, right? Like from seeing some of our Arizona GOP at the DNC, seeing policy shift and change, and us electing officials that are more progressive. It's the first time that I'm able to see like that we can have impact on our at the state level. But I think what's happening, unfortunately happening in Texas, is like it feels like there's an inability to move the needle forward. We're seeing Heritage, ADF, Ken Paxton, Abbott really just take hold and create such a shift in policy in such an authoritarian way that people are feeling like there's no way forward. And we're seeing that in Florida too, right? Like where we saw DeSantis remove LGBTQIA places and locations for tourists coming to visit Florida, right? Like these are distinct shifts that are what would happen to us and could happen to us if we saw a Trump presidency through Project 2025. And so seeing this is so disheartening. As somebody who comes from immigrant roots, identity documents are like essential and necessary for you to exist freely in this country. And seeing that people can't change their gender markers to match their gender in states like Texas or Florida, it's awful. I hope that there's some resolution in the future. We need to get Abbott out of office.
We need to get Abbott out of office. We need to get Paxton out of office. I was hoping the impeachment inquiry into him would have had borne some fruit. Unfortunately, that is not the case because Republicans in Texas lack intestinal fortitude. But I do think that their day is coming to an end. I do feel like there is some hope because Arizona, I think, is at somewhat of a watershed moment when you have decisions like this going in favor of transgender people. And I think we are seeing in Florida, like they recently had just a whole slew of elections where those, candidates were just trounced. Like those candidates didn't win. And in the courts, some of DeSantis's policies are being challenged and rolled back. It may be a drop in the bucket today, but I think that is how all movements start. It starts with a drop, then a trickle, then a flow, and then eventually it becomes a tsunami. It just takes, just like I said, it takes one drop. And so I don't think we should throw up our hands and give up hope because this is, I think, a turning point. As I said at the top of the show, I think we're at a turning point.
I had a friend the other day who is like just extremely progressive and like was like, no, what we're hearing is similar to what we're hearing from Trump. And it would be the same thing if Kamala won. And I was like, no, it's not. And here, let me tell you why. A few years ago, when we were living under, 5 years ago, when Trump was still in office, Ducey was in office, right? Who was our Republican governor at the time. The amount of stress and advocacy work I had to do to push against anti-trans legislation in the state was way different than having a Democratic governor who is moderate, right? Katie Hobbs is not a progressive. She's a moderate Democrat, but pro-LGBTQIA rights. Like it's a different condition to organize under those levels than it is to organize under what was Trump and what was Ducey at the same time. And so I can't imagine what would happen in Texas and Florida if it was Trump, DeSantis, and Abbott all over again, right? And so it is so important in this moment that we continue to like remind ourselves of what it felt like 2016 to 2020, because it was significantly different. People could feel the pressure and the oppression that we were feeling in that moment. Okay, Stephen.
I'm glad you said that because I've been having discussions with people around the hope and the excitement that I feel and I'm making declaratory statements about Trump's demise. I'm making declaratory statements about the blue wave that's coming in November. I'm making declaratory statements about the positive future for trans and non-binary people, for gender expansive people across the board. And I've been getting a lot of pushback from people who were like, oh, that's how we felt in 2016. And, don't get too ahead of ourselves. And I'm like, I'm sorry. In 2016, we did not know the existential threat that Donald Trump actually was. We had an idea, but he had never been in office. He had never held public office anywhere ever. And so it was only because we saw how he comported himself as president that we know beyond the shadow of a doubt that a second Trump presidency will be a fucking shit show. And so I know that more Americans know definitively who he is and what his plans are. Project 2025 and Agenda 47 are explicit in terms of what they plan to do. And we know that there was another Project 2025 that preceded, there was Project 2016, which got implemented. 60% of what that think tank said should be done actually got done during his first presidency. And so I know that there's enough data around who he is that the middle of America, which is where this vote is going to be decided, have determined that he is not the one to be trusted with a second term. I don't care what anybody is going to tell me. That is where I'm putting all my money. All my chips are on black, literally and figuratively in this election. And you can't tell me, don't say that and don't do this. And we haven't, fuck that. I am going balls to the wall, Kamala Wall, because I believe that this election is going to change the trajectory of our respective and collective lives. And I'm not going to, mince words, and I'm not going to perseverate over it. I'm going to be as definitive and declaratory as possible because I think change is coming, and I'll be damned if I don't speak truth to power and manifest this shit. Just like we manifested Dwayne Wade and trans liberation, I believe that we are manifesting Kamala Harris and Tim Walz for president and vice president in 2024. Fuck that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think it's like, I'm like, do you not remember what it was like to wake up every day and see fuckery on the news? I mean, like, and I think that people have come to terms with the fact that like America is an experiment and we are on a precipice, right? Like, I think that is not lost on us. And it was clearly spoken about at the DNC. And I think that to say that they would be the same is a lie. It's just not true. Like, I know because I was actively advocating those 4 years at the legislature, year in and year out. And it was significantly different. And so when organizers say, we are trying to organize from here and not here, they mean it, right? If Trump wins, we're underwater. And the path forward is going to look different. In fact, there will probably be more exit strategy as opposed to being able to speak to an administration where you can give change. Like I didn't share this, but I had a private conversation with Kamala Harris's national campaign manager. And I was like, hey, I just want to share with you that like when I read that statement around protests for Palestine, the language was very similar to what would have come out in the previous administration. How can we have nuanced conversations around peace and liberation that doesn't sound like, Black and brown people gathering in protest for what's right as something that's criminal and violent, right? And she was very receptive and it was a short conversation, but she was very receptive. And I think it's because communities of color are coming from this place of like, you see January 6th rioters getting off, but like they had time to build a gallows on the National Mall. In Arizona, some guy drove a guillotine to the state capitol, like a guillotine, and like set it up and was standing, there's photos of him just standing next to his guillotine. And so that is real violence, right? Charlottesville was real violence. And so how do we start to have those nuanced conversations about our free speech and gathering without utilizing terms and phrases that would be utilized against people of color on the norm, right? And so I think, yes, these are the ways in which we can create progress and move forward and have conversations and also do what's right for our country and push for better international policy. Okay. All right, Stephen, I'm gonna stop ranting because we went on one. So I just want to say that I love the fact that Kelly Robinson represented LGBTQIA people at the DNC, despite the fact that our pro LGBTQ plus candidates didn't explicitly raise the issue at any point during the convention or in either of their speeches. At the 2024 Democratic National Convention in Chicago, transgender voices were notably absent from the main stage, a stark contrast to previous conventions where trans advocates like Sarah McBride and Danica Rome were featured. Despite their party's strong pro-transgender rights stance and a historic number of trans and non-binary delegates, only 2 speakers briefly mentioned trans issues, both outside of primetime slots. The omission seen by some trans advocates as a missed opportunity reflects the party's strategy to appeal to swing voters who may not prioritize trans rights, even as anti-trans rhetoric escalates from the GOP. I just want to say, if I can, I just want to say that Kelly gave Daniel a shout out. So yay, Daniel from AZ.
I was definitely disappointed and a little surprised that that was the case this year. I definitely felt like with Kamala Harris, who has been pro LGBTQ since day one, and Tim Walz, whose whole history is around starting a GSA at his high school as the football coach. Like, both of these people have personal stories steeped in the support of the LGBTQ plus community. For them to have not elevated those voices in this moment across those 4 dates, it wasn't like it had to be every single day. It wasn't like it had to be on the day she accepted her nomination, but at any point during that time, they could have done more to make sure that the voices of transgender people were centered. And it felt like a huge missed opportunity, especially considering how much attention was paid to the DNC, how much energy has been generated since Kamala Harris became the top of the ticket, how many people showed up and showed out for Kamala Harris to make sure that she had the money, she had the volunteers, she had the support. It just felt like the move to the center, which I understand, and I'm going to say it again, the move to the center, which I understand, still pushed trans people to the margins. I was disappointed.
I was disappointed too. It reminded me of like being at the carne asada, on your case, the cookout in the 90s, where your butch family member brought their friend and you couldn't ask about it because we just ignored shit like that. I feel like that's where we were. We were like the hidden, like all there ready to party. And it was like, but don't make it awkward for like our cis white friends who are visiting, right? Like, don't mention it, don't bring it up because we need them to be here.
Absolutely.
It was disappointing. And I get that it's strategy. And I think that it's in these moments that we have to remember that we're voting for ourselves, not just Kamala. Right? We are voting for ourselves in this moment and voting for our loved ones and our family members. And then we get to work and we don't stop pushing for a more progressive, politically brave elected official.
Yes, I said it in the beginning of our show. I'm going to say it again. We have to stay focused on preventing Trump from having a second try, a second bite at the apple, because if he does, all bets are off. And so, as disappointed as I am, and I am disappointed, I soothe myself by focusing on the prize. And the prize is depriving him of a second term and ensuring that this pro-equality ticket makes it into the White House.
And I just want to say that I want to be excited. Like, a part of me is excited, and then another part of me is like, okay, fine. You know what I mean? Like, you know, when your parent says something and you're just like, why? Why are we still here? That's how I felt in certain moments, but also like excited that I'm excited by seeing so many other people excited. I think a lot about what James Baldwin said, that he was a patriot. I'm going to misquote him, but like, I always see this video on Instagram where he was like, I love this country and I am a patriot. And to be a patriot means that we criticize it where it falls short. Right. And I think like you and I saying we're disappointed doesn't mean that we're not like going to help knock on doors and get the word out and get people voting, because I am going to do everything I need to ensure that she wins. There's no way that we can let Trump win. And I know you feel that too, but I also think that it's okay for us to criticize our elected officials and to say we want more from this country, from this great experiment in which we all want to be equal, safe, and free. And so, you know, I don't know. I was excited. I loved every single one of your outfits, your matching outfits with Nicole.
Let's talk about those outfits. But wait, first, let me say that I agree with you 100%. As Black and brown people for whom the history of this country has been abysmal. What they've done to our people time and time and time again. Like, just recently, the judge determined that the cop cops who killed
Breonna Taylor.
Breonna Taylor were not legally responsible for her death because her boyfriend, who shot at the cops in self-defense, was the proximate cause of the cops shooting back and causing her death. It was not the falsified warrant that got them into her apartment in the first place. It was the fact that her boyfriend, thinking that there were intruders in the house, shot at those cops. Just flawed logic, but this is where we are. We have to accept when our lives aren't worth shit, and still we fight for this fucking country. You know, I'm text banking. Like, I intend to do what I can to get Kamala Harris and Tim Walz in office. Like, I'm doing my part. I'm not sitting by complaining about things. I'm not sitting by hoping that this change that I want to come or that I am projecting will come is going to come. I'm doing my part to ensure that it does come. And I will still be critical of this country because this country needs to be made aware of the ways in which it's failing us.
Yeah.
Two things can exist at the same time.
That part right there. Yes, yes.
Lisette, we can rant on, but I want us to end on a high note, and that is those outfits that we rocked every day this week, okay? We had a different Harris Walz shirt for every day of the week, and everywhere we went, people were like, love your shirt, thumbs up. Where did you get that shirt? Wanting to take pictures with us. We saw Senator Teresa Louise from New Jersey rocking our Harris 47 shirt. And she was just like, oh my goodness, you two could be our hype men. When I get on stage, I was like, yes, we can. Got a picture with her. But so many people were just in love with our shirts. We came correct every single day. And those outfits were winners.
They were winners. They were so fire. Daniel was like, I want the collegiate tee. So you're gonna have to send me the link because that t-shirt was fire.
So interestingly, we were at the New Jersey delegation breakfast outside waiting to see who we were going to see because all these like big old SUVs were pulling up with Secret Service, etc. So we were like, okay, we're going to be able to catch some famous person coming in or going out. And so we were outside the hotel where the New Jersey delegation was staying, and we passed a woman who asked us where we got our shirt. She was walking her dog, and we were like, Amazon, because of course, you know, we were a little ashamed. So we were like, you know, we giving Bezos our money like he needs it. This woman went to grade school with Jeff Bezos, was talking about how he was dirt poor, how she would ask him to come over her house because her mom was always cooking. And so she would feed him, and how he was just one of those people who, when he saw a problem, he could just look at it and come up with solutions, and how he came up with solutions for the student council to make money for their school and all these things, and how he earned his money. Even though he's a gajillionaire many times over, he is not one of those people who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth or thinks he's better than other people. He was very much salt of the earth. And I was just like, who would have thunk standing on the streets of Chicago, waiting for some photo ops with celebrities or whatever, and some random white woman passing, walking her dog, admiring our shirt, would have been related to Jeff Bezos and had this wonderful story about who he was and the type of person he was. I was just like, ain't that some shit?
Well, my favorite DNC story, which I wasn't there, but as I told you, Daniel filmed like a little package with Kelly Robinson because she was going to share his story from the stage. And then they texted me and were like, Lizette, send us photos. And I have one of my favorite photos is Daniel from Transprom sitting on the Supreme Court step. And I sent it to them and I was like, hey, you have to ask Amara and the Translash team if you can use it because they gave it to me. They're the ones who own the photo and they sent it to me, and I can use it privately, but you have to ask if you can use it. And so Amara then found out about this video package that was going to happen, and we were texting. And so Kelly came on. Kelly mentioned Daniel from Tucson, Arizona, and then got off stage. And then like a couple hours later, Amara's like, still waiting on that video. And I was like, me too. And then we learned that it was Oprah probably. It was probably Oprah. We're going to blame her anyway. Oprah needed some time because she was a last minute ad. And then I feel like we just got like the you get a car moment, but like we're all going to vote Kamala. And I was like, it was worth it because I love Oprah.
I love Oprah, and I love Oprah's speech, and I love the fact that he was just like, I'm an independent, and I want all my independence. I was just like, you better work.
When did Oprah become, has she always been independent?
I think she's always been independent.
Wow, I didn't know this. We learn new things. But it kind of felt like,
Everybody.
okay, so like I used to read all of the books on Oprah's book club, which now I'm mad because she made like that hillbilly elegy famous, right? Like she made JD Vance a little famous. He wouldn't have been famous without Oprah's book club.
Not at all.
But I like love Oprah. And so I was like, Daniel, you were like close to Oprah, sort of in universe. She may have heard of you, maybe through
Daniel
Kelly
Oprah
Speech.
adjacent. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh
So,
man.
Lisette, I think we've arrived at the end of our rant. I'm feeling good. How about you?
I think we hit some happy notes after the doom and gloom.
Here, here. Well, that's our show for today, folks. I'd like to thank my co-host, Lisette Trujillo, for calling this audible and giving us the opportunity to get some of this heavy shit off our chest, because every once in a while, you need an epic rant.
And Stephen, thank you for being our eyes on the ground at the DNC. You know that I couldn't do this without you. And of course, Stephen and I couldn't do this without you, our listeners. So thanks for tuning in to the Parent Advocate Podcast.
And folks, please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and do whatever you've got to do to stay up to date with everything going on here at the Parent Advocate Podcast.
Goodbye.
Bye.